The heavy doors creaked open. All eyes turned. An old man shuffled into the courtroom, wrists bound in cold steel. His uniform, creased with age, clung to a body worn by time. His head hung low, face weathered like an old war map. Each wrinkle a scar, each step a secret. "State your name," the clerk said. The man looked up. His eyes, piercing and haunted, met the judge's for a second too long. "Thomas Wilson," he said, voice barely more than a whisper. "Staff Sergeant, United States Marines." A murmur rippled through the room. The judge, composed and sharp, began scanning the file in front of her until her hand froze. Silence. Her face turned ghostly pale. The name on the file. It couldn't be. Thomas Wilson. The same name. The same man. The one who had once dragged her wounded brother across enemy lines in Mosul under a hail of bullets, saving his life before vanishing into thin air. Her lips parted. It can't be. But it was. And what came next, no one in that courtroom was ready for. Thomas Wilson, 69, sat hunched on the courtroom bench. His shoulders were lost in an old military coat, much too big for him. Under the harsh courtroom lights, the lines in his face grew deeper, carved by years of suffering. Once he wore dress blues with medals on his chest. Now he waited for judgment in borrowed clothes from a shelter. Case 47B, called the bailiff. City of Pinecrest versus Thomas Wilson. Charges: disturbing the peace, trespassing, resisting arrest. He stood up slowly. His joints hurt, worn down by time and untreated wounds. Vietnam first, then Iraq. Injuries visible and hidden, carried silently across decades. "Mr. Wilson," said the prosecutor, young and polished, his voice practiced. "He's been warned several times about hanging around behind Riverside Cafe. The owner filed 3 complaints this month alone. But what he didn't say was this: Thomas never begged, never asked for handouts. He just sat near the alley vent trying to stay warm when the winter night closed in. Then came the officer's testimony. Found him behind the cafe at 11:45 p.m., refused to leave when ordered. Thomas hadn't refused. He'd quietly asked for 5 more minutes to finish half a sandwich a kind cook had given him. But back then, his words didn't matter. They still didn't now. "Your Honor," the prosecutor continued, "this is his 3rd citation this year. We recommend 30 days of community service and a no trespass order for downtown. Such an order would ban Thomas from the Pine Street shelter, the only warm place he had left. It would shut him out from church meals. It would leave him alone outside during the coldest part of the year. Mr. Wilson," Judge Rebecca Morgan finally addressed him, "do you have a lawyer today?" He shook his head. His public defender had been pulled into another courtroom for urgent business. "Would you like to speak for yourself?" she asked, looking over her glasses. Thomas cleared his throat. His voice came out low and rough. "No excuses, ma'am. Just needed to stay warm." "Why that location?" the judge pressed, her expression unreadable. Her tone had something more in it. He hesitated. "Mike the cook leaves food sometimes. Known him since he was a boy. His father served with me. Desert Storm." "And your service?" the judge asked again, breaking normal procedure. "United States Marine Corps," Thomas said, straightening slightly. 1975 to 95. Staff Sergeant, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. Iraq. The words landed with weight. Decades of buried pride finding breath for the first time in years. She made a quick mark on the file, then kept reading. Something deep in Thomas Wilson's military history made her pause. Before she could say a word, the courtroom doors opened. A sharply dressed man in a tailored Navy suit walked in with purpose. He reached the defense table, set down his briefcase, and faced the bench. "Your Honor, Benjamin Hayes. I've just been hired to represent Mr. Wilson. I apologize for the sudden appearance." Thomas turned, confused. He hadn't called a lawyer. Couldn't afford one. Especially not a man wearing cuff links and leather shoes. "This is highly unusual," Judge Morgan said, watching him carefully. The court wasn't told about new representation. "It was a last-minute development," Hayes replied, calm and composed. "I respectfully request a short break to speak with my client." Judge Morgan studied them both. Her face revealed nothing. "This court will take a 15-minute break," she said, rising and walking quickly to her chambers. Thomas leaned toward the stranger beside him. "I don't have money for this," Hayes replied softly. "You won't need it. My firm, Williams, Hayes, and Morgan, is taking this case for free." Thomas furrowed his brow at the name. Morgan, like the judge. "Exactly like the judge," Hayes confirmed. Inside her office, Judge Rebecca Morgan took off her glasses, hands unsteady. 20 years on the bench had taught her control, but nothing had prepared her for this. "It can't be the same man," she whispered. But the evidence was too exact. She opened a desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph, a younger version of herself standing beside her brother, Lieutenant Sam Morgan, in his Marine dress uniform. His arm rested proudly across her shoulders. They were smiling wide, full of hope at his commissioning. Beside the photo sat Sam's final letter from Iraq, the edges worn thin from years of quiet grief. In it, he'd written about a firefight outside Mosul. His unit had been trapped. But then came Staff Sergeant Wilson, charging into gunfire, dragging a wounded Marine to safety, covering the retreat as others pulled out the injured. "If not for him," Sam had written, "none of us would have survived." 2 weeks after that letter, Sam had been killed by a roadside bomb. Rebecca remembered the funeral, the folded flag, her parents' silent heartbreak, and the Marine who approached afterward. "Your son saved my life," he'd said. "I was the one he carried." He never finished the sentence. He didn't need to. She had never forgotten his name. Thomas Wilson. Years ago, she had tried to find him, hoping to hear more about Sam's final moments. But the military had told her he'd been sent back almost immediately. Later, they said he'd been discharged with severe PTSD and a brain injury. Now, 2 decades later, he sat in her courtroom, a stranger to everyone but her. A knock broke the silence. Hayes stepped inside, his face concerned. "Rebecca, what is this?" he asked, as her late husband's former law partner and lifelong family friend. He was one of few who called her by name. "It's him, Ben," she said, pointing to the photograph. "The Marine who saved Sam, the one who carried him out of that ambush." Hayes's expression changed as understanding sank in. "The homeless veteran in your courtroom? That's Thomas Wilson, the same man you've been trying to find for years." Rebecca nodded slowly. "His service record confirms it. Mosul, 2004. Same unit as Sam. He was given the Silver Star for the exact battle Sam described in his letters. Does he know who you are? I doubt it. I married David after law school. Took his last name. Wilson wouldn't recognize me now. It's been 20 years. She took a breath, trying to steady herself. How does a hero like that end up like this, Ben? How does someone who once saved lives wind up alone on trial just for trying to stay warm? Hayes shook his head. In the short time we spoke, I got the sense he's endured more than most. Severe PTSD after his last deployment. His wife left while he was overseas. His benefits got caught in red tape. He did construction work for years until his injuries made it impossible. After that, job loss, eviction, and finally the streets. Rebecca closed her eyes. Sam's voice echoed in her memory. Wilson was the best of us. The kind of Marine who'd risk everything for his brothers. If I turn out half as good, I'll consider myself lucky. Hayes spoke gently now. You could remove yourself from the case. No one would question it. No, she said firmly. I'm not letting this man disappear again. You know there are ethical risks. I do, she said, straightening. But there are ethical duties, too, especially to those who gave everything for this country. When Judge Morgan returned to the courtroom, her posture was perfect, her voice steady, her face unreadable. But those who knew her well might have noticed her hands, the slight shake as she adjusted her papers. Mr. Hayes, she said formally, has your client made a decision? Hayes rose smoothly. Yes, Your Honor. We're asking for dismissal of all charges. Mr. Wilson wasn't trespassing. He was trying to survive a dangerous freeze, and we can show that restaurant employees gave him implied permission to be on the premises. The prosecutor opened his mouth to object, but Morgan held up a hand. He fell silent. I have questions for the defendant, she said. Her focus turned to Thomas. Mr. Wilson, your military file lists Mosul 2004. Is that correct? Thomas straightened. Decades of instinct returning. Yes, ma'am. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. And on April 17th, were you part of an operation near the western edge of the city? Confusion flickered across Thomas's lined face. Yes, ma'am. We were escorting a supply convoy when we got ambushed. During that firefight, she pressed, did you rescue a wounded officer, Lieutenant Sam Morgan, while under enemy fire? The courtroom went still. Thomas's eyes narrowed, the name sinking in. Memories stirred beneath the years. Morgan, he said softly. Yes, young Lieutenant Brave, took a hit trying to pull a wounded medic out of danger. Thomas's voice drifted into recollection. I reached him, dragged him behind cover. He kept shouting at me to go help the others instead, told me to leave him behind. In the gallery, a silver-haired man in a Marine League jacket leaned forward, his attention sharpened. And what became of Lieutenant Morgan? Judge Rebecca asked, her expression composed, though everything beneath it trembled. We got him on the helicopter, Thomas answered softly. He made it to Germany, I heard. But a few weeks later, his convoy hit a roadside bomb. His voice caught. For years, I've wondered if saving him only delayed the inevitable. Maybe I made it worse. Before anyone could respond, the silver-haired Marine in the gallery suddenly stood up. That's him, he said loudly, pointing. That's Staff Sergeant Wilson. I was there. He saved 6 of us that day. The room stirred. Judge Morgan tapped her gavel once firm, but missing its usual edge. Order, she said, though her voice didn't carry its typical weight. The courtroom settled into a tense hush. Thomas kept his gaze low, clearly uncomfortable with the spotlight now bearing down on him. The older Marine didn't sit. Still standing, his voice was steady. Your Honor, he said, I don't mean to interrupt, but I was there. Wilson took fire, pulling that lieutenant out. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, while Mr. Wilson's military service is admirable, it's not relevant to these charges. Judge Morgan cut in sharply. The court disagrees. It is deeply relevant. She placed her gavel down slowly. This court will break for 10 minutes. She turned to the bailiff. Please see that Mr. Wilson remains here. Then, just as she started to leave the bench, she paused, something rare. Her eyes met Thomas's for the first time. Really met him. Mr. Wilson, she said softly, when I return, there are matters far beyond this case that we need to discuss. Inside her chambers, the judge finally let her guard drop. She pressed shaking fingers against her lips, as if containing 20 years of buried grief. Then, after a long breath, she picked up the phone. Colonel Richards, it's Rebecca Morgan. Yes, I know it's been a long time, but I need a favor and I need it urgently. Exactly 10 minutes later, she returned to the courtroom. She was not alone. 3 Marines followed behind her. A full colonel, a master sergeant, and a young corporal carrying a polished wooden case. Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. At the sight of those uniforms, Thomas stood instinctively, his joints stiff, but his posture proud. Muscle memory had overpowered the years. Judge Morgan took her place, but instead of reaching for her glasses, she set them aside. For the first time in her judicial career, she addressed the courtroom not as a judge, but as a person. "Before we continue," she said clearly, "I must share a personal connection to this case." She looked directly at Thomas. "The Lieutenant Sam Morgan mentioned earlier? That was my brother." Gasps echoed across the room. Thomas's brow furrowed, recognition flickering in his eyes. The tension in the room was thick enough to feel. 20 years ago," Rebecca continued, "my brother wrote home about a staff sergeant who saved his life in Mosul. He said this man ran through enemy fire to reach him after he was wounded, then covered the rest of his unit as they evacuated the wounded." Her voice held steady, but her eyes were wet. That man was Sergeant Thomas Wilson. From the gallery, the Marine from earlier stepped forward again. "It's true," he said. "I saw it with my own eyes." Wilson took 2 bullets, pulling that officer to safety. Judge Morgan gave a small nod, then continued. 2 weeks later, my brother was killed in action. At his funeral, several Marines approached our family. They spoke of Sam's courage, but also of the man who had given us 2 extra weeks with him, time we otherwise never would have had. Now, she looked directly at Thomas. "After Sam's death, I tried to find you, but the Marine Corps said you'd been sent back to duty. Years later, I learned you'd been discharged, but no one could tell me where you went." Thomas stood silent, every emotion rising across his weathered face. "I never stopped searching," she said. "And now, whether by fate or something higher, you walk into my courtroom." She motioned to the colonel beside her. "This is Colonel James Richards. He commanded my brother's unit. He has something to share." Richards stepped to the bench. "Staff Sergeant Wilson," he began, "the Marine Corps has been trying to locate you for quite some time. Your personnel file was one of thousands reviewed under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative," he explained. "New intelligence regarding your deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan required an update to both your medals and your benefits." The corporal beside him opened the wooden case in his hands. Inside, a medal rested on deep blue velvet. "By order of the Secretary of the Navy," the colonel announced, "in recognition of extraordinary bravery on April 17, 2004, the Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Staff Sergeant Thomas J. Wilson, United States Marine Corps." Gasps echoed across the courtroom. The Navy Cross, the second highest honor after the Medal of Honor. "Until recently, parts of your mission were classified," Colonel Richards continued. "But your actions that day didn't just save Lieutenant Morgan and 5 Marines. They stopped an ambush that could have wiped out the entire convoy. Your Silver Star has been officially upgraded," he finished. Thomas's jaw clenched. For the first time, his composure cracked. "There must be some mistake," he said quietly. "I didn't do anything special. Just did my job." "No mistake, Sergeant," the colonel replied, his voice firm. "And this is long overdue." From the gallery, a voice rang out with crisp authority. "Attention on deck." The silver-haired Marine stood at full attention, and others followed. Veterans, former officers, even civilians who recognized the weight of sacrifice. One by one, they rose and saluted Thomas Wilson. Soon, the entire room was on its feet. Even the prosecutor stood, caught between legal duty and human decency. Judge Morgan, no longer able to contain herself, wiped at her tears. Her voice shook as she spoke. "In light of these extraordinary developments, all charges against Staff Sergeant Thomas Wilson are hereby dismissed. Permanently." She brought down the gavel with force. "This courtroom is adjourned." As the room began to settle, the Master Sergeant approached Thomas with a tablet in hand. "Sir, we've been trying to find you to fix your VA records. Your disability rating has now been reassessed. 100% service connected. Going back to your original discharge date. Thomas blinked, stunned. What does that mean exactly? It means you're entitled to full back pay, sir. Complete medical coverage, housing assistance, educational benefits, anything you need going forward. Hayes stepped forward with purpose. Our firm will make sure every single piece of that is processed. No more delays, no more roadblocks. From the back of the courtroom, Mike, the cook who'd left sandwiches behind the cafe, stepped forward, his eyes filled with emotion. My dad used to tell me, Mike began. There was a Marine who saved his whole platoon. He said, if you ever meet a man named Thomas Wilson, you owe him everything. Mike reached out a hand, tears falling freely. I never knew that man was you. Not until today. The prosecutor, visibly moved, approached slowly. Sir, I had no idea. Please accept my deepest apology for how this case was handled. Thomas stood amid the rising room, his posture regaining its quiet strength, as though decades of unspoken honor were finally being lifted, one breath at a time. Judge Morgan stepped down from the bench. There was no distance now, no barrier between them. She stopped in front of him, her voice steady, but filled with meaning. My brother once told us what you said to him that day, she began softly. No Marine gets left behind. Not while I'm still breathing. Today, Sergeant Wilson, we finally keep that promise to you. 2 weeks later, Thomas Wilson stood before a mirror, adjusting to a life that still didn't feel real. He was inside a quiet apartment, part of a housing program built specifically for veterans like him. The walls were simple, bare, except for one frame, a display of his newly awarded Navy Cross, flanked by his long-lost Purple Hearts and service medals. Hayes had tracked them down, recovered from a storage locker sold off years ago. A knock pulled him back. He opened the door to see Rebecca Morgan, not in robes, just herself, holding a small box. May I come in, Sergeant Wilson? She asked. Just Thomas is fine, he said with a humble smile. Then it's just Rebecca, she replied, stepping inside. They sat across from each other in the modest living room, the quiet of their shared past thick in the air. I brought something, Rebecca said, opening the box. Inside, a bundle of worn letters carefully tied. They're from Sam. He wrote us weekly while he was deployed. This one mentions you. It's dated the day after you saved him. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. Sam's handwriting, clear, sharp, just like he remembered. Mom, Dad, Thomas read aloud. Don't worry about the news. I'm safe, thanks to one of our NCOs. Staff Sergeant Wilson did something yesterday I still can't believe. When our unit was ambushed, he moved through enemy fire like it didn't exist. He refused to leave me even when I ordered him to. Said no Marine gets left behind. Not on his watch. Thomas's voice cracked. He mentioned you often, Rebecca added quietly. Said you were the Marine he looked up to. He was a good officer, Thomas said softly. Still young, but he cared about his people. That's rare. Rebecca looked around the apartment. After Sam died, I went to law school, she said. This Veterans Court program, the housing initiative. It all started because of the things he wrote about how the system forgets its own. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. I'm not a hero, he said. I just did what needed to be done. That's exactly what heroes always say, Rebecca replied with a quiet smile. She hesitated, then added, There's one more thing you should know. The day Sam died, he was leading a mission to track down insurgents targeting civilians. He volunteered for it. His final letter said he wanted to live up to the example you set. That sentence hit Thomas harder than any battlefield wound. For 20 years, he'd carried the weight of doubt, wondering if saving Sam had been a cruel delay, if his sacrifice had even mattered. He didn't die because of you, Rebecca said gently, reading him like a book. He lived the way he did because of you. They sat in silence. Two lives woven together by service and sorrow. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady, covering the city in quiet white. Finally, Thomas spoke, voice barely audible. For years, sleeping on sidewalks, I kept thinking no one remembered, like none of it mattered anymore. Rebecca nodded. But it did, she said. To Sam, to every Marine you saved, and to me. As she stood to leave, she placed a hand on his shoulder. Sam used to say the measure of a Marine isn't what he does in front of a crowd. It's what he does when no one's watching. You live that, she whispered, even when the world forgot. Thomas stood taller than he had in years, a quiet strength radiating from within. Someone remembered my name, he said softly. After all this time, someone remembered. In that single moment, something long broken began to heal, not just in Thomas Wilson, but in every soul forgotten by the system they served. Some heroes save lives, then spend a lifetime waiting for someone to save theirs. But sometimes dignity doesn't need glory.